Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September meeting of the Lower Makefield Township Historical Commission. This is our first meeting since July, in which we only had a partial meeting because we did not have a quorum for a full meeting. So we're going to kind of regroup after summer and kind of lay out our goals for the rest of 2022. So before we do that, we're going to have one personnel change, and unfortunately, James is leaving us. So I was glad you were able to join tonight, James, so we can thank you for all your efforts and for representing us on the ad hoc property committee. But we're really interested to hear what's next for you and what you'll be doing over the next few years.
Sure. So, well, thank you for recognizing me and for serving as such a great chair, and you as well, Helen, on the time that I've been here serving as chair. I finished up my master's degree, so now I am working as a community organizer for the Progressive Turnout Project in Philadelphia until the end of the election, and then I'm still working out what I'm going to be doing post the election, but hopefully somewhere here in Pennsylvania or in DC, probably.
Okay, good. And you said you're moving out of the township.
For the time being, I'm going to be in like different places a lot. So in all likelihood, I'm probably not going to be in the township in the next couple of weeks, but it's all a little still up in the air. So
James is tenure. I think tonight, this is your last meeting, right? This was the last time. So he was in
so I was appointed until October 2022.
Right. So we will have a vacancy that we need to fill. But again, wanted to thank you for all your efforts and for joining us, and wish you the best going forward.
Yeah, thank you all.
It's
been really awesome.
If you ever want to come back, you know where to reach us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll be here, I'm sure. So, well, good. Thanks. So that creates a vacancy, and I will contact Katie about making sure that's posted on the site. I did look on the boards and commission sites for the township last night. They have a couple of vacancies posted, but not this one yet. So I'll make sure that gets there, and we'll see that it gets out into social media. In the meantime, if you know anyone knows anyone to join, please feel free to reach out and invite them and have them contact us. Right? So our agenda for this evening, where is here? So with James leaving, James was our representative on the ad hoc property committee. And Dennis Stedman contacted me, and he asked me if I would then represent the historical commission on the committee. And I said, yes, I would. So I'll take over James's position doing that. The committee actually has not met over the summer. Starts meeting again tomorrow. And they'll be starting to work out. I mean, the primary thing they'll be working on is an RFP to have a vendor come in and do the master plan. If you recall, before the summer, I think it was either in May or June, actually it was at the meeting at the end of May, the Board of Supervisors approved a sum of money, I want to say $300,000, if I recall correctly, in order to develop a master plan for Patterson Farm. And now that process has to start in terms of putting out an RFP to see which companies would respond, choosing the right company, development of the plan. So that'll be what the committee's focused on going forward. It also creates a vacancy, though, for treasurer. So, James, do you want to talk about the responsibilities of the treasurer?
Sure. So there hasn't been too much in the past couple of years, but we have a fund of about $5,000, and that's just been accumulated over the years. In the past, we've used it to do certain kinds of events like tours of the Slate Hill or like events at the Slate Hill Cemetery. But yeah, I mean, it's basically just keeping track of that and working with people if there's any events that would need funding to make sure that it's not going, the fund would be able to support those kinds of events. So, not too much.
We get a small budget at $500 a year from the township, which I don't think we spent any money this year on that. So that also plays in. So So we need a new treasurer. So I'm already as chairman, Helen is vice chairman, Chris is secretary. So Tom and Victor, I'm looking at the two of you.
I'd be happy to help to jump in on that.
So I will make a motion to elect Tom as the treasurer. Do I hear a
I'll
second?
second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Tom, you have a new title now to add to
Woohoo!
your long list of things. So,
All right.
and the other thing,
I'll do my best to fill your shoes, James.
the other thing, just as we go forward, is we do have another member of this committee, Barbara, who has not been able to join us because this time doesn't work for her. So I did contact Katie to find out what other times might be available for us on a regular basis. And there were two. One of them wouldn't have worked for Barbara. So the time that works for Barbara to join us is on Monday at 6 p.m. And the township has availability this first, second, or third Monday at 6 p.m. And I just wanted to check with you people to see, would that work for you? Is Monday a problem? Is 6 p.m. a problem, or can we move the meeting?
It's fine with me.
Victor, does it work for you?
No, it does not, at least for the next couple months. Yeah, I got a class from 6 to 9 on Mondays.
All right. All right. So, well, you know what? Let that go. We'll come back and we'll visit it again at the end of the year. And maybe we'll be able to
I mean, if you guys want to go forward with that, it's fine. I can just, read up on what's going on and then, email anybody if got any comments or anything just up until the end of the year, because that's after, December. That's it. I won't have an issue after that.
I also
Well,
need,
it makes no sense to make accommodations for one person and lose another person.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I would say keep it at Wednesdays, and then at the end of the year, we can reassess.
yeah, because I don't even know if it'll work for Chris, so he's not here. So we'll say we'll keep it here. I'll just let Barbara know that had to happen. Okay. A couple of things. So I think what I wanted to do was just kind of go back to the 2022 goals and objectives we set and just kind of assess where we are. And, I think we were very optimistic at the beginning of the year in terms of setting, I think, 3 different objectives, right? For a council that has, 6 people or something. I think it's probably too optimistic, but let's kind of review where we are on those things and which ones we want to do by in the end of the year. And then the other topic was I was talking to Jim Majewski and about things that we should be thinking about. And he said we should be thinking about items that we want included in the 2023 budget. Now, we have thought about this before, and I actually sent I sent an email to Dan back in May because there was a request from Dan back in May to what funding priorities would we have when the sewer money came in. So I'm going to review what I put on that list. We can see if that's still valid or if we want to add anything to it, okay? But first of all, is there a way for me to share the screen?
Just hit the share screen button at the bottom.
Okay, let me just get here. We'll go over here. And can you
There you
guys
go.
do this okay? Make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So it started with, what's the resolution? Why are we here? And it's all about looking at properties that are historically significant and advising the Board of Supervisor on the appropriate handling of those properties. So we had set 2 objectives under advocate for preservation of township resources. One is to support the Board of Supervisors in the ad hoc property committee in implementation of the recommendations in the committee report. So James was our representative, and I'll take that over again. That work will be continuing, at least through the end of the year as we get the RFP together. The second was to create a plan with funding requirements for some resubmission of Patterson Farm to the National Register of Historic Places. And I know, Helen, you have been working on that. Tom, you had. So I think that seems to be something I would suggest we keep moving forward with as we go through the year, correct?
I agree. That should be our primary objective as far as I'm concerned.
Helen?
Helen, you're on mute.
I know, I have to unmute here. Yeah, the sound is not good, so I've got a piece of foil kind of balanced on top of my computer to bounce your voice forward, Joe. That's fine. I think I would agree. That's the primary right away. And then we can look at the, the various requirements under the master plan for implementing the Secretary of the Interior standards in any kind of rehabilitation, restoration, preservation, whatever we decide
Right,
the township directs.
right, okay. All right, so we'll keep that on our list. The next one is around cataloging township-owned materials on the history and historic resources to augment the materials from the Lower Makefield Township Historical Society. And Chris had wrote a grant. We actually submitted it on July, last day of July. It was due on August 1st. So that grant is in. It's the PHMC Historical and Archival Records Care Grant. We have not heard yet, but I still think even so, we should keep moving forward with this because there's things, if we get the grant money, that's great. We can move forward with cataloging and digitization. But even if we don't get the money, there is still stuff in the basement of the township building that just needs to be sorted through. And Helen and Chris and I had a look at it once, and a lot of it is duplicates of duplicates, right? And for those types of things, they need to be pulled aside and recycled. There is a lot of files down there around from the historical commission itself, and they should be put into a separate pile. But what we're really looking for is are there files or information around historical properties, that we want to save. So, and that's something that if we can get together on, for a couple of hours a month, we can definitely sort through that. So I would say that we keep moving forward with that. Everyone agree?
I totally agree.
Okay.
Joe, I did have a conversation with Jim Majewski this week because I'm still getting contacted when someone asks the township for historic information on a particular house or a family or so forth. And I ended up meeting with 6 members of the Slack family to discuss the Slacks and the houses related to their name all along the upper side of Lower Makefield Township. Anyway, Jim and I had a conversation on the side, and he mentioned that he really would like to see that whole project restarted and possibly with funding, and then basically that we should take over again the online presence for the Lower Makefield Township history page and kind of continue to do that as well. So I'll add that in.
Which page is that, Helen? Which history page?
The Facebook page.
Facebook page, right? Okay. Yeah.
I have access to it. Jim has access to it. I thought I gave you sharing rights as well, but if not, I will. It's easy to do. So basically, every month I or Jim was uploading a story or some picture with some minor stuff, and we got up at one point till we were having about 750 hits a month, which was pretty good.
Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. So we will definitely keep that because we need to understand where all of this information is. The other one in that category was to do a survey of historic resources in the township to support the baseline survey effort. Now, it turns out that we did support the baseline survey effort. If you recall, they had put out a request and they wanted us to give a response. I think it was back through SurveyMonkey or some other online tool, but they were really kind of targeted to certain types of organizations or cemeteries they were looking at. So their scope is actually very, very tight. So we did that, but we have not looked at the overall survey of historic resources that we have in the township. That is still, I think the last one we did, Helen, was that 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now?
Well, by sheer chance, Barbara Rickett came back into my life this summer, and Barbara Ricker, and she was the woman who had the original grant from the township to take the photographs in 2004 to 2006.
Right.
And so she lives in Morrisville, and she was very positive about kind of getting back into some of the stuff and helping us out. So that was interesting and a good contact going forward.
Mhm. You know what? Why don't, if you don't mind putting me in touch with her, and then
Sure.
maybe this is something that we put on tap for next year as we move into next year. And if she's interested in helping out, that would be great. I do remember, I need to go back. I looked through the materials and I reached out to Matt Metcalf at Bucks County Community College because
Right.
Barbara was a student there when she did. And I was looking for like a table of contents or an index or something like that. And Matt didn't have it. So maybe Barbara has it and she can help to.
She has complete notebooks on it, which she submitted, I guess, to Bucks for her certificate program. And of course, she did mention that she hadn't been paid for the final, I don't know, installment under Terry, which I knew about as well. And it is true that she had not been paid for that. So I'm sure that's partly on her agenda. She is taking care of her spouse who is very ill right
Okay.
now. So that's kind of also on her mind.
Right.
But as I said, she was so interested just to make contact with somebody else outside of the current life she's leading. So it was really kind of interesting to get in touch with her again. I'll certainly share that with you, Joe.
All right, thanks, Helen, and I'll follow up with her. And then we had two things under Educate. One is we were going to do a YouTube series and post that to the Facebook page, but maybe we don't do videos, or maybe we could do a video, but we just do other things, like you said, Helen, just to get back into the routine of getting things on the Facebook page on a regular basis. And then we were going to hold at least one in-person event regarding.
Yeah. I really do think we need to do a little more than what we were doing on the Facebook page. Again, I have a grandchild in 4th grade at Edgewood, so that's the year that they study the history of Pennsylvania. So I will make my presence known to the teacher, same teacher that Lucy had, so she knows what we did before, and we'll try to figure out a better sequence to presentations. So at that point, I think if I do something that is more viable, my voice is a little better. And if not, we can get someone else to narrate. I think Tom would be great. But basically, put together something that we can put up permanently on the township Facebook page. We have really lost a lot of our basic history that we used to have on the Facebook page. I could find nothing on the current township Facebook page that really talked about our history.
You mean, right, on the township Facebook page, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The township Facebook page. We actually used to have a history of Lower Makefield Township up there.
It's not there anymore?
Go ahead.
It's not there anymore? I mean, it was there. Okay.
So I would like to propose that we move this out of the 2022 objectives into next year,
I agree.
because there's no way we're going to get anything
Yeah.
done. And I think the more important things are the National Historic Registry application
Right.
and the cataloging of stuff that the township has, the historic stuff. So is that okay with everyone?
I think we could do maybe something brief, maybe by the end of the year, in terms of a short video or something, just to so I have something. And then maybe next year focus on doing a longer series of sorts, basically.
I think if I recall last time, it was in the spring that they really got around to doing the I can revise what I did. I still have my presentation from Lucy. So I need really shortened and focused. So I could probably send it to you, Victor, and we could discuss it as we go through it, and you can figure out how to shorten it and focus it. And I think that's a project probably just after the end of the year. We can start that first thing in the spring.
Yeah, I think Victor's a good idea to plan for January, right? You know, we're not saying,
Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be upon us sooner than we think, you know, so if you would like to have a look at that, because I mean, one of the questions that I have too is what's the appropriate length? I mean, do we want things in digestible 5-minute bites, or is that too short? Or do you want something a little bit more in depth? And, you know, are we going to put it up on Facebook, or are we going to put it on YouTube? And so, I mean, we don't seem to have a strategy for that. So Victor, as much as you have some thoughts in terms of saying, here's the best way for us to do that, here's the audiences and how I think we can reach them, I think that would be great.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a short YouTube presentation would be, or maybe 2 or 3 would be good.
Right.
So do we need to make this official that we're going to move this effort to next year?
I think we move the development of it, but we start the planning of it now, right? So.
Okay.
Yeah. So like Helen said, after the new year, we're ready to go. Otherwise, we'll be sitting here for the,
Tom's right.
for the
we
first
need
3
to
or 4 months
focus.
of the new year.
Yeah.
You know? So, all right, that's good. We'll do that. And then, okay. So we're going to stay with the ad hoc committee. We're going to do the Patterson Farm, and we're going to continue to work on this catalog project. And when Chris is back, we can kind of talk about how we might be able to move that forward. I'm not sure when we're supposed to get a response on the grant, but we'll see how we can move it forward before the grant money comes in, if we even get the grant. Okay. Let me move on to the next topic, and that was the funding priority. So back in May, when Dan asked us for funding priorities for 2022, we put together and sent an email. We sent the first 3 items. The 4th item I added based on the work that Chris had done for the grant. Because one of the things that Jim asked me for is that if we're going to apply for grants and we need matching funds, we have to make sure the township budgets the matching funds, and we'll need matching funds for Chris's grant. So what we had talked about in terms of funding priorities was repairing of the stone wall at Slate Hill, and we had given it $5,000 for materials, labor provided by volunteers, but we could always hire someone to do that. A phase 1 archaeological survey at Patterson Farm to support the submission. And then the octagonal schoolhouse, acquisition of the property and development of a site interpretation plan. Do we still feel that they are, and then the 4th one on here is actually Chris's project. That was the title that he used in the project: survey and index documents and audio and tapes of historic value. And I need to just go back and what our matching funds would be for that. Do we still believe they're the appropriate funding priorities going into next year?
I don't know anything about the stone wall at Slate Hill Cemetery, so I can't comment on that. But as far as the second objective, the archaeological survey at Patterson Farm, I see that as a nice to have and not a need to have. And that in no way, shape, or form should be a requisite for submitting the application to the National Historic Registry. So I think, you know, if we have money at some point in the future and we want to do that, fine. But I would not make that a prerequisite for sending for submitting the application for the National Historic Registry. The octagonal schoolhouse, Joe and I actually had a little chat about this on Monday. I think that's in the we can't do everything category. And my understanding is that there's nothing there other than a piece of property. And for us to devote time and effort and money towards that right now, just to me, doesn't seem to make sense.
So let's go through them one by one. So the stone wall at Slate Hill, I mean, I walk through there every week, so it needs to be repaired. I mean, there's parts where the wall is falling down, right? It just, in general, the cemetery doesn't look very good, you know, for something that's on the National Register of Historic Places. So we might even be, Helen, we might even be more aggressive. in terms of thinking what needs to be done at Slate Hill. It's not just the wall you've talked about, remapping certain graves and certain headstones. It's not in very good shape, So I do think that there is a budget request around some money to maintain that cemetery.
Joe, when you say budget request, what are you talking about?
A request that the township puts money aside for work.
So as a committee, we suggest that the township does that, and then they decide to approve or not, and do they take our recommendation as to who will do it?
Well, then depending on the size of the project, it may have to go through an RFP. So we'd have to develop the RFP, and same thing the ad hoc committee is doing right now, right? Smaller projects or services only projects, I don't think they need to, but for bigger projects, they would need to do that.
All right, that makes sense.
All right, Joe, two things. The stone wall it has the oldest section of the cemetery has a cement stucco covering over stone, and that is all falling off. I mean, it's literally in 6-inch sheets falling on the ground. I was there yesterday, actually, because I took the slacks there to show them our other cemetery, since they had seen the other two, and St. Andrews and the one on Quarry Road. So I took them there, and it's really not in good shape. And there were many stones that have just in the last year have been overturned, just flattened down. And when we did this before, we actually got rolled a motor mounting lift from a car repair place that actually could create this hammock to pick the stones up and then reinsert them. But that was actually done by volunteers, and the wall was done after the Historic Commission was given permission by the supervisors to write up proposals, put it out to bid. They had to meet all the standards of the national Secretary of the Interior standards for historic cemeteries. They have, believe it or not, standards for that. And get the bid out, and we had bids that were all over the place, and we took the low bidder, and he repaired the second section stone wall. So that section is in pretty good shape, but the section that's in front of what's called the segregated third part, the Anderson section, is in bad shape, and there's not very little remaining of the stone wall that was against the Pico driveway. And I still haven't investigated whether they actually covered over stones in that section as they put in that driveway. It's very close to the property line. I don't know. But it really could use a lot more love and care. Now, some of this could be done with Eagle Scouts doing laid up stone with supervision. But really, we should ask the supervisors, I think, to dedicate in the next couple of years. I mean, just doing the second section, I think, was $20,000 for the stone wall.
Okay,
So that's how much it will cost.
right.
There's also trees that need removal. There's big old locusts that are dying. They're covered with poison ivy, and they need to come down, because when they come down, they're going to take out stones.
Mhm.
So they really should be cleared. Jim is aware of this. We've been discussing it over the last 4 or 5 years, but it's really going to depend on what kind of township manager comes in, whether he delegates these things to the committees to handle, or he's very hands-on and he wants it, all booked and, I's dotted and T's crossed from the township building. So it kind of depends on the style of the manager, whether he leaves it to a volunteer group to handle it, or he wants to put it onto the township payroll. I don't know. And Dan will know that when it happens.
Right. But I think it's, within our charter to make sure that we're bringing to their attention, the work that needs to be done there.
This is a Dan job.
Well, yeah.
This is something we delegate to Dan to just keep it in their attention that cemetery is not going to improve by itself.
Right, but what Dan wants, Dan called me yesterday, right? So what he's looking for from us is to put this in writing, to him again. So that's the commission to put down. So we'll leave that on there, maybe expand it. We'll at least put in, say, 20 to 30 just for the wall.
Yeah,
Then
I would think.
if you talk to,
Right. And the other thing is the octagonal schoolhouse. I I have just recently been listening into HARB meetings. So one of the things that's coming out of the Prickett Preserve is that they intend, since they're destroying several historic buildings, they intend to donate or make some step in lieu of that destruction in reparations to the historic fabric of Lower Makefield. And they're suggesting a paper on the Prickett House or something. I don't think that's very valuable. But if they wanted to make a nice donation to the octagonal schoolhouse acquisition and kind of give us some matching funds so we can apply for a state grant to get that site dug and recorded, I think that would be the way to go, to kind of direct, again, have Dan suggest that to the Prickett developers, that might be a way to start a fund to get that back running. The stones are still there, Tom. They're just covered over. There's quite a few there. There's quite a few missing. Some have been stolen, but it looks to me like the entire building has been collapsed into the center. So it's still there. There's two corners that are still there. We have the actual design of the building, the drawing that's in the Spruance Library. We have the subscription of all the people in Lower Makefield that donated to it. And there's pictures of it from the 1930s. I don't know whether it can be totally rebuilt. It was stuccoed, so the stone could be covered with new stone. No one would really notice the difference. But it just recently I've discovered that it was the place for the first abolitionist society meeting in Lower Makefield in 1832. That kind of puts it into a different category. It's always been recognized. Steve Sanasiero has always recognized it as a state of, as a site of statewide importance. It's the first octagonal schoolhouse in the state of Pennsylvania, and pretty obviously the first octagonal schoolhouse in the country. This sort of trend spread up into upstate New York. There's one actually just outside of Ithaca, New York, an octagonal schoolhouse. There's, of course, the one in Wrightstown, about the same vintage as the one that's in upstate New York. And the most of the public school acts passed by states in the 1830s made this building obsolete, and they went with the 3-bay, 3-window, center door schoolhouse designed all over the country. But it is a unique architectural symbol. I suggested to my husband that maybe he should get the AIA involved. They're always looking for projects. And this project would have not only significance to it as an architectural item, but also because of the Abolitionist Society and the start of the Underground Railroad activity by the Quakeside Hicksites of Lower Makefield Township. They don't have any recognition because it was an illegal thing to be active in the Underground Railroad, but quite a few local people were involved. And
so Helen, would your objective be to rebuild that?
I would love to see it rebuilt personally.
And then what?
It would be at the gateway to Lower Makefield. And I'm trying to get Mr. Majewski interested. They're going to do a bunch of traffic adjustments so that people can cross from the developments on both sides of Township Line Road to the Kohl's Shopping Center. So there's going to be a crossing at that intersection or slightly down toward the other opening for pedestrians to cross that 6-lane highway that we've got there now, or 8-lane highway. So I would think a pavilion behind where the octagonal schoolhouse is. There's a pull-off for parking in that area. I think it could be an interesting educational site and something that would really be a gateway to Lower Makefield. Personally, I know Steve Sanasiero has always said that. We've been discussing it since the days of, what was that development that was going in there? Matrix.
I mean, from an octagonal schoolhouse point of view, one exists over in Wrightstown. Why do we
1835, yeah, it was copied from ours.
but given that there's one standing in Bucks County, how do we add to the historical, intellect of the county if there's one just a couple of towns over that's already there?
I mean, that's true. There is another one. Ours is the first. That is
But it
always
doesn't exist.
an amazing thing, that this was designed by basically a landscape architect from Lower Makefield after one of his garden folly books from England. And he's seen it in the Book of Follies in landscape gardening. And he decided it would make a perfect shape for a school building. I mean, so we're talking 1775, the year before the American Revolution breaks out. And the following year, Washington's in this township. That's just amazing that a young man from Lower Makefield Township was thinking about the education of all children, male, female, black, white, whatever, rather than war.
I mean, I understand the history of it, but I guess the most I could see is we could apply for a planning grant from,
Right.
from the Keystone State around how to do site interpretation.
Well,
Because
Steve
right now,
sent us
there's
here.
nothing there,
No, there's, that's it, but it could be. That's the thing. Steve Sanosiero was saying, you're really dreaming here, but it is there. It is the foundation of the building is still visible.
Right.
And it could be rebuilt, and you could do this at a lot of expense. And is it worth it? That's what he would say. But he also said, but if you decide you're doing this as a state representative, I can get you funding and I can certainly push it in the
Okay.
state legislature. So he had said that then. Unfortunately, I've never been able to get a board of supervisors to agree to purchase it. That's the problem. And we don't own it. That's the biggest
the biggest
obstacle.
Right.
And part of that plan is going to have to be, what do you propose to do with this
Right.
That's
building
where-
and this property? And saying that it's a gateway to Lower Makefield doesn't help at all.
But that's
That
where
means
we
it's
can apply
meaningless
for
to me.
a planning grant, right? We can apply to the state for a planning grant to have someone come in and do site interpretation and give us alternatives of what we could do at that point, right? But I think the bigger issue, as Helen points out, is it's on our property, I mean, we could do all of that, right? I mean, and they could sell it to, Walgreens to put a drugstore there,
Wrightstown opens theirs once a month, and everyone knows when it's open. It's staffed by the local historic commission, and they welcome especially children to come in and see. We could certainly do the same. As I said, the actual door was sort of in the 8 o'clock position if you're looking at it from the red light. So it would be, it's a lot better than if it were actually parallel to Township Line Road. It was actually turned toward the west. So I guess they would get additional light and air into the building and from that angle. And the date stone, which the picture shows, is 1775, right next to the door. And as I said, Steve was saying, well, with the pavilion next to it, with pull-in slots, it's about a quarter of an acre of land actually there, and it's down probably 4 or 5 feet. You wouldn't recognize it when you actually walk up to it. The Oxford Valley Road bed is 4 or 5 feet above your head as you're in that wooded area there. So it's actually not even as noisy or as crazy as you would think. You almost feel like you're in a private wooded glade. So if you had a little pavilion in there, and it would be safer at that point for people crossing the road if there was a pavilion, just saying.
Well, I will talk to Dan around just.
Dan's here.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Can you see me?
no, I don't see
Okay.
it. Okay, well then we will talk to Dan right now. Dan?
So we've talked about this one can you hear me? I just want to make sure you can
Absolutely.
hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. So this one, we have tried to get in touch with the owner of the parcel. The parcel map's not working right now, so I was trying to bring it up with the parcel boundary on there, and it wasn't showing it. The parcel layer wasn't loading for me. That being said, a couple of things are going on in that area right now, and one of which is that we're planning some walkway improvements to the Regency on Big Oak, and the little sort of, I guess, what's that, Helen? Old Oxford Valley Road there? The path that goes next to it. So that's
It's Old Oxford Valley Road, and then it's Township Line Road, and I forget the name of the person. There's a little name for the section of Old Oxford Valley Road that goes up behind the Shell
I get
station.
you. So essentially, we're doing we're going through engineering plans right now, specifically to improve walkability right there between Regency North and South. We're putting in some crosswalks and some other things, and we're connecting it through that path to Regency. The biggest hurdle, as we all know, is that we don't own it, and it doesn't seem like the current owner has a heck of a lot of interest in selling. So obviously that's the number one hurdle to doing anything there. And then from there, I do like the idea of a planning grant. I don't know, Joe, if you've gotten in. I know you've been reviewing the grants. If without ownership of the land,
You can't.
they won't give you the grant, I assume,
No.
or that you're severely limited.
Yeah.
They score you too low. So I think it's interesting, but I don't. We have to have a willing seller and funds to buy it, obviously, but we also have to have a willing seller. And right now, I don't know that we have one.
We need a negotiator from the Board of Supervisors is what we need. Or we need to ask Steve Sanasiero to do it. I mean, it's coming to that level. Barbara talked to the new, apparently the old generation has all gone as of last summer. So she talked to the lawyer for the new generation that owns it. And they think it's worth a fortune. It's a 1/4 acre on that corner. We can put up a big sign and, sell advertising and have it rotating constantly. I mean, I think our position that it's in the road right of way would probably negate any use of it. And we need somebody who has some authority to kind of let them know that and how much we would appreciate if they would negotiate with us.
Well, it's also subject. We can only when the township is buying land, we're subject to having to get 2 appraisals, and we can't. We can only pay what the appraisals say it's worth. We can't pay any more. We might be able to pay less if they're willing to do that, but whoever wants to do that. So it's not that we need someone to come in and rescue us and negotiate something on our behalf. It's we need if they think their highest and best use is going to get them, somehow get them a windfall of money. I'm skeptical about that, but it's 2/3 of an acre.
No, it's 1/4.
It's 2/3. I'm
Oh,
looking
is
at the
it?
parcel map. Yeah, it's 0.636, so it's just shy of 2/3.
And what's his zone as? Commercial?
Well, so that's another big question, Joe. Generally, you're in a commercial zone over here. However, this is the Regency, and I would have to see if this particular section, because the Regency isn't built to zoning regulations. The Regency is built based on a lawsuit settlement. So you can almost throw zoning out the window when it comes to this part, for better or worse. That's just the way it is. So everything is handled very specifically and very carefully in this area because of that, the governing lawsuit / ordinance that covers this area.
And
And I'm
they
not
didn't
sure if
even
this is
know. They
excluded.
didn't even know that they didn't own it.
Who didn't know that they didn't own what?
Regency did not know that they did not own it because they put
Oh.
their building trailers on that lot.
Well, that's a no-no. But I mean, so when it comes to what they could build there, I've done enough. I don't know what if they could ever put anything there. I'm sure they could try and figure something out, but they have no access, no park. It's a triangle. If you look at the parcel map,
Yeah.
when you get a chance,
Right.
it's very narrow triangle
Yeah.
with barely any access. So,
Right.
I think it's limited in what they could do, and if they wanted to do like a sign or something like the Middletown M, that's not going to fly either. But I just as an example,
Oh, God.
I'll get that out of the way.
Understand?
Good grief.
Yeah. So Joe, to your point, there's not. I think the point part of what you're saying is there's not much we can do with it now.
Right.
It would be a neat thing from an interpretive history,
Mhm.
so to speak, if we could do it. The Regency folks with the new walkways that we'll be putting in. I mean, there's already a walkway there. We're just going to clean it up and make it better and make it more connected north to south at Regency. That might be something that they might be interested in seeing, as part of their experience.
Right.
But I don't know if they're not willing to sell it for a good price, and it's only 2/3 of an acre where it is, and they can't build on it anyway. It'll be a tough sell to the rest of the board. We know that, but I would like to see. I wish the landowners would work with us to even if they do put something there at some point, even if it is just a sign or something, that we do something with the remains of the building that are there, if we can. But I would like, I don't know if anyone's gotten photos of it lately. If we know what's still there, what kind of condition it's in, even if it's just the foundation.
I was there not too long ago, and as I said, there's still two corners of the building very clear, about 3 feet up. I mean, 3 feet high. You can see where the other corners are, and most of the stones have been pushed into the center. So it's there's a lot there. From the photograph from 1930, you can tell that there are two outhouses right where those two ash trees have died right behind it. I think Mr. Greg Hucklebridge had actually taken down the tops of the ash trees so that they wouldn't fall on the ruins. But now we've still got the trunks standing there that should come down as well. And they were tiny little saplings in 1930. It's really kind of cool to see the old pictures. And there was a boys' outhouse and a girls' outhouse. The well is currently where Pico has put a big electrical box for the crossing light system. So that site is kind of damaged, and that was over toward the east of the building. So, I mean, whether that's totally covered or not, I don't know. I remember identifying where the well was way back in like 1986 when it was still had the door frame was still standing at that point.
Well, has there been for any state funding or at that intersection, you got state roads around here?
Yeah,
there must be a study that they had to do for PennDOT.
Steve Sanacero had the road moved to the south, and that's why there's just that one lane when you turn. Steve actually did that on the master plan when they were building the Matrix Center. He had them, because he knew it was there, he had them actually move the whole road south so that it's more over toward the CVS than it had been originally. So there's actually like 5 feet now between the edge of the road and the building. but it's not much. I mean, it's really close to the edge of the pavement.
But so when they did that, because it's a state road, PennDOT
Yeah,
District 6, they would have done, and you can
Yeah.
probably find it on PA Share. They would have done a report that documented that building.
and the
would assume.
pole, there's a telephone pole that's literally right against the stone.
So it sounds to me like these are sort of academic questions until we know whether or not that we can acquire the property. So we know who owns the property. Is anybody in touch with them?
Yeah,
Barbara,
we've tried in the past.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, it sounds like that would be the first step. If they don't want to sell it, then none of this stuff matters that we're talking about.
well, it does if you exercise condemnation, but that was something that the Board of Supervisors hasn't been willing to do.
So is it worth approaching the owners again?
I would say someone who is diplomatic. I know Kristen Tyler has tried it and tried it in the past. I know Grace Gottschalk tried it. I know, depending on the board, but I've never asked Steve. But he's very good at that kind of thing. He might be able to schmooze somebody. I don't know.
Steve,
You know.
CR.
Yeah.
Well, and until we have an answer to that question, I think none of this else.
We'll just stop right here. But that's yeah.
Yeah,
It's my point is, Joe, that it should always be kind of on the radar. This has been going on since Walt Flowers stood up at township meetings, probably the first township meeting I ever attended in 1985 to discuss this then, because he was so upset since his ancestor was Moses Moon. So he stood up and basically advocated for it. And it seems like every 20 years there's a resurgence of interest in this octagonal schoolhouse because it's the first, because it became an architectural model for so many, over 350, I think, in the Delaware Valley and upstate New York area. So it is kind of really interesting. There's subject of poetry and all kinds of, literary speculation in the antebellum period. I was unaware of its connection to the Abolitionist Society until I was reading newspapers last spring for the African American Society of in Langhorne, that I discovered that, and I was just stunned. I couldn't believe that they agreed to meet at midnight at the Octagonal Schoolhouse for the abolitionist meeting.
So Dan, you said we would need to get an assessment of the value of the property. Is that worth doing now so that we could present an offer to the owners?
We wouldn't do that until after they express some interest, if and when they express some interest in in entering into some agreement. Because getting an appraisal might cost $4,000 or $5,000, and we have to get a couple of them per rule. So it's tough to spend that type of money if we think if there's no chance of success here.
Okay.
I mean, and it could always, and for something like this, we would hope that they might even consider donating it to the township.
Yeah,
That would also be helpful.
Dan, I began this conversation talking about Prickett's Preserve because the Harb was mentioning that the developers for Prickett's Preserve had said that because they had taken down some historic buildings and they were interested in making sort of a payback to the township for that, but in lieu of actual payment, they were thinking of having a paper written or something about, and it's not really that valuable to us to do that, but if perhaps they would put together some funds for, say, a new plan, like either restoring the walls at Slate Hill Cemetery or helping the township acquire the Octagonal Schoolhouse site, that would be something that maybe we could negotiate with them.
So the question is there anything the Historical Commission can do to help with the acquisition of the land? Because if not, we got to move on.
Yeah. At this point, at this juncture, I would say no.
Okay,
I mean, you can individually approach whoever you want to approach at the township level or whoever, and try and sell them on an idea. But at this point, it's like any other open space. If we don't have a willing giver or seller of the land, then there's not much we can do just yet.
Well, do we want to engage Steve Santasiero to see if he'd be willing to talk to the owners?
I don't know. I mean, the township has tried multiple times and they've said no. I don't know that Steve. I don't know.
Who is closest to Steve on the board?
He talks to all of us on a regular basis.
Okay, well, I mean, I know he knows me, and I know if you mention that crazy lady is discussing the octagonal schoolhouse again.
No, I'll see him next. I might see him tomorrow, actually.
Okay, great. That's
I'll
all
bring
I
it up in
ask.
conversation.
That's all I ask, Dan.
Yeah, I'll see him at least once before the next meeting, and I'll see if.
Okay,
I mean, the path forward, if we have it, is clear, right? We can go for a Keystone Planning Grant. That's, they'll match up
Right.
with 25,000, so that gives us 50,000. With that, we can put it out to bid, have site interpretation done, and come back and, come back to the Board of Supervisors with a plan for the site and cost for that, right? So that's clear how to go forward. But if we have to get the property.
Yeah. So, Joe, and you may have already spoken about this before this specifically, but do you have, whether it's this site or any other one, do you have a priority list
So
for sites that you would want to go after that?
When I'll kind of bring people back up to date. Let me go back to sharing my screen here. Because we had discussed what the 2023 funding priorities would be, okay? And Dan, if you remember, as we were getting ready, or as you were getting ready to go into that meeting, that special meeting at the end of May, and then the one in June, you had asked us to put together a list of 2022 funding priorities. And in the first three items that are on here were in the email that I sent you. The fourth item on here is actually the grant that Chris developed and submitted at the end of July. And Chris, we need to kind of work through, I'm trying to remember what the budget and all was for that, because if the grant's awarded, we need to provide the matching funds. But if the grant's not awarded, we still need to do the work, and we should probably look at putting that money in, requesting that money be in the 2023 budget, so we can get that done. But you and I can come back to that fourth one and just kind of work through the budget assumptions there, okay? So the fourth one is for Chris and I. The first one is we talked about Slate Hill Cemetery, and Helen has talked to Jim about that. Jim Majewski, we already have we have a previous estimate for the repair of the wall that we could use for that. There's some other work that needs to be done. I actually don't live too far from Slate Hill Cemetery. I see it all the time. So I will talk to Jim about what we could put on the list for 2023 for that. Then we were just discussing the octagonal schoolhouse, and now we have to talk about Patterson Park. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
So Patterson Farm, we had on our list the archaeological survey. Tom, you said previously that you think it's a nice to have. We also had at one point this discussion around the dendrochronology project. And I guess one of the things and this came up in our July meeting, what's not clear to me is what was the shortcoming of the previous submission? Meaning, what gap are we trying to fill in order to resubmit this? And then if we were, I think, all clear on what that is, we could begin to say, how do we close that gap and what resources do we need?
Exactly.
And Joe, when you're talking about that gap on the submission, just for people, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing it too, but that is the submission to get Patterson Farm listed on the National Register. Is that correct?
It was submitted, the timing was last decade, right? Or, 2 decades ago in the 2000s. And it wasn't shot down. It was actually the Pennsylvania SHPO, State Historical Preservation Office, came back and asked for additional information. Now, if I recall correctly, Helen, I think only Patterson Farm, not Satterthwaite property, was actually part of that. So, so again, there was, when I read the submission and I read the SHPO's comments, to me, the one thing that stuck out that I remember is they wanted information around crop yields, what crops were grown. If you're going to submit this as a farm, you had to know what crops were planted there, what the yields were, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't recall whether there was any additional information that you're asking us about the structures themselves. Helen, Tom, I think you both read through the submission and the response. What's your understanding of the gap?
Joe, the initial submission had both sides of the farm, but they were divided in such a way that it was very confusing for the SHPO board to figure out whether we were submitting for one side, like the AOY house and the fields around that and the barns around that, or we were submitting for the Satterthwaite house, or we were submitting for the whole thing. They didn't see any relationship between the farm and the historic district, which they wanted us to, basically the writer was Kimberly from Heritage Conservancy, to relate that. So there was nothing at all in the verbiage about how Crossroads Village, which was already accepted on the National Register as representative of multiple Crossroads villages in Bucks County that are now gone, basically supported farm enterprises around those Crossroads villages. So by selling the crops, et cetera, and shoeing the horses and creating the wagons and doing all of that. So that has to be done basically for the new national period, which I can do. That's not a problem. There are also much better resources than there were in 2004 for agricultural surveys that show, and census documents. Agricultural censuses are taken every 5 years and can show exactly what was grown on that farm in the various sections of the farm. So that can be added to the original submission, and it just needs to be better written.
Yeah.
And I think it will go through.
Yeah.
So what we had hoped was to do the dendrochronology so that I could positively date the structures there as relating to particular genealogical information that we knew that there were people living in structures. Having had the dendrochronologist out there, he kind of made me aware that we were probably not going to find the kind of information that we wanted from his reports. We could still have it done, but it would probably, he was of the opinion that the Satterthwaite house was a rebuilt structure on an earlier foundation, and therefore we wouldn't find any wood samples that would date the earlier foundation, and that the samples that we could find in the little cabin were so, because the boards that were, or the actual tree trunks that were laid across to support the floor were young trees in, if it is 1690 structure, they were young trees with not very many rings. So even if they're still intact, it would be very hard to date. So that with that information, it becomes less necessary to push for that dendrochronology.
Yeah, I suggest that we drop that whole
Yeah,
idea.
I agree with Tom.
We shouldn't need it to get this
Yeah.
application approved. And
Yeah, exactly.
as you said months ago, it reeks of junk science. So.
Right. To me, it does seem that. And I did ask my favorite archaeologist about it, and she kind of rolled her eyes and said, well, so the same sort of hedging, that they don't want to trash other scientists, but they are very leery about accepting it as fact. On the other hand, that's so cute, Dan. On the other hand, the archaeology was something different, because that was about removing the soil that has to be removed around the Satterthwaite house, has to be removed in any case because of the infiltration of possible, what is it, Dan? Lead?
Lead, right?
Yeah, there's lead all around all the buildings, probably about 20, 30 feet out, about a foot deep. So we have to get that remediated just from a
So we might
health
as
and safety
well have it,
perspective.
yeah, so we might as well have that be a dig, is what we kind of came to.
So you're saying that we should do the archaeological survey before we remediate the lead problem
Yeah.
to make sure that we're not destroying anything.
Well, we really don't want that cost in the landfill if it does have artifacts in it.
Right, and to make sure that, right, we're not, yes, we're not going to destroy or dispose of anything that's important. Okay. And Dan, you said, when you and I spoke yesterday, you said we should also be thinking about, these remediation steps that are needed at Patterson Farm. Like the ad hoc committee's process is going to take a while to play out, but there's things that we could do like this lead removal and other things that could happen next year, correct?
Yeah, and as a reminder, the board of supervisors voted to put a lot, like $300,000, I believe,
Yeah.
towards that type of thing. That way, and I'm the one that was pushing for that. So my thought process was, let's get done what we can get done so that we can clean things up, make it safe, and get it ready to go once we do have a plan in place. And then I think we all have varying opinions, I think, about, how to, who could or should be stabilizing the buildings, at least initially, and how that might get done. So I don't know that I can speak for a majority board opinion on that, but the sooner we can get stuff done, the sooner we can stabilize the buildings. This is my youngest, Isabel, by the way. She's in kindergarten, so she's a history
Hi,
buff.
Isabel. Say hi to Lila.
That's his puppy, Lila. Yeah. She can't hear you because I have my headset on, but
Okay.
That's right.
but she knows you're talking to her. That's why she's smiling.
Totally good thing.
But so I think the more we can do just to get things ready and prepped, the better. And soil remediation, and some of those other things, we don't need a plan for that per se.
Right.
Punk. So we can just keep moving on that stuff, and I would hope the board would support that.
Can I make a motion, Joe, that we use the phase 1 archaeological as our priority in this list, and then repair to remind them that that needs to be put into the budget on a yearly basis. And then a future plan would be to acquire that schoolhouse site.
Why would the archaeological need to be on a yearly basis?
Just to support Dan's idea that since we have to do remediation around the houses anyway, that we ask for a bid from a preliminary bid from an archaeological group to do that
So
remediation and at least look at the artifacts that are in it.
So if I could comment on that, just because it's my world, we'd have to put out an RFP.
Right.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure that there aren't too many archaeological firms that also do soil remediation. So we would have to make sure that they could work in lead soils contaminated with lead in a safe manner. Not many of them can, so we may have to talk to a soil remediation firm to see how they could do that in conjunction with an archaeological firm to make sure that we can do, walk and chew gum at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yes, and we can.
So I get what you're asking for, and I understand it. It's just we have to be careful about implementation.
But I'm trying to think about scope and price, Helen. So, I mean, when we say 20,000, and I got that number from Prickett, right? Because that's what they paid for theirs. Would it be $20,000 per farmstead? Meaning 20,000 for Satterthwaite, 20,000 for Patterson? Because I mean, there's multiple buildings, right, that need to be looked at.
Yeah, Yeah, I think it would probably be larger.
Right, it would be.
I would just ask for bids.
Yes, well, I'm just saying, if we have the money budgeted, then we have to start, as Dan would say, we have to start, right, we have to write an RFP for it and get bids and things like that, you know? But again, no sense doing that without the money, so I will,
Well, Joe, can't we apply for grants though from Keystone for that kind of thing as well?
I mean. we
I
still
think
need
it's a
to-
matching grant for
we still need
archaeology.
to keep on, right, yeah, yeah.
Helen, what happened to the DAR willingness to give us some money?
I got no reply, zero, nada.
What do you mean you got no reply?
I emailed the person that had said that they were interested in donating and heard crickets.
So,
Okay, did you send them an email?
Yeah,
I wonder, your email got cloned or something recently.
yeah, it got hacked. It definitely
Yeah.
did.
So maybe it went into their spam folder or something.
Yeah, I could do it again.
Yeah, you might want to try with a different email. But as I recall, I think you said they had $5,000 that they could potentially
Yeah,
give us.
and the Patterson Farm Group would be willing to make a donation as well, but they haven't firmed up how much that would be either. And we do have money in our account also, but I mean, if we could pool things, it would probably help the supervisors at least look at it, especially if we could, anything matching Keystone grant.
Yeah. Okay.
have you all thought about what would be the scope of the archaeological, the phase 1 investigation? I'm thinking from this purely like when I'm costing these things out with people, number of shovel test pits, how many STPs do you have on the grid? Where would they go? How you implement it? And the more STPs you add, the higher the price. So you have to put a footprint together.
Why do we even want to do that?
I don't disagree with you. So
It's
that's why
a complete waste of money and a complete waste. If the objective is to get these properties on the National Historic Registry, we absolutely do not need that, and it's a waste of money.
But no, Tom, I think you have to listen to what Helen said before. When Dan talked about them coming in and having to do lead remediation, right? And removing some of that soil, right? Because it's contaminated. What Helen is saying is you want to have an archaeological survey done to make sure you're not digging out, 17th and 18th century artifacts and putting them in a landfill somewhere. Right. So I think it's independent of the National Register, but it's something that, is going to need to be done as we look to.
So we're specifically talking about the Patterson Farm here, right? Because those are the only buildings that are painted, basically, right?
You're talking about Satterthwaite primarily, right?
Yeah, Satterthwaite. So someone had told me, I thought it was you, Helen, that they had done a lead evaluation on that property and they didn't have any lead.
No, they
it's
found
full
lead.
of lead.
Apparently-
The paint and the soil is full of lead.
So yeah, no, they found lead in that soil. Now there supposedly is the latest biological thing is that corn apparently takes out lead, but I don't think the corn is that close to the house.
Well,
Oh,
and
so we eat the lead instead. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, you don't want that to happen because you bioaccumulate it and it doesn't break down. You don't want
But
phytoremediation is not the key here.
interesting. It is an interesting fact. Yeah, nobody knows. When we got that paint approved by the state, it was okay. And then all of a sudden they raised the standards or whatever to include the amount of lead that was in the paint that they had previously approved for our grant.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's what happened. And apparently there's one interior room that was painted purple with iridescent lights. So that room has lead paint as well. And I think the kitchen, there's like 2 rooms that have some lead paint. But
that
in
won't
any
be part
case-
of any archaeological assessment.
so I would say, I think that the soil that has to be remediated is like 8 feet out from the house. Is that correct, Dan?
I think it goes out I'd have to double check the report, but you're probably looking at maybe even 15 to 20 feet out, depending on,
Whoa,
depending on where. And it's at different, the further out you get, because it blows out and you lower
And-
concentrations and not quite as deep and all that, but regardless, still
Is it
needs to
just
be
the
done.
house, or is it the barn and shed too? Because they're.
All the buildings that
RV
had
areas.
any painter have it.
Anything
They're all
that's
the same
white.
condition.
I mean, wait, right.
Basically, yeah. It's a good way to
So-
think about it, Tom.
So who do we need to get in touch with for this?
What we need to do is we need to get the money to do the phase 1 archaeological survey. And then, as Dan was saying, when we write the RFP, we have to make sure that we're putting into the RFP that they're working in contaminated soil.
But don't you have to have a quote from somebody before you can come up with a budget?
I mean, you're just working around numbers on budgets, right? Like I said, this was the numbers that the Pennsylvania SHPO made DeLuca do for Prickett. So that's how we got these.
So Joe, to your point, so the way it has to work, Tom, because this is a township budget issue, we have to, if we're going to do this, we have to put it in the township budget. So we need those round numbers, right? And then we have an RFP. Once the budget gets approved, we put out the RFP, we get the quotes back, and then hopefully it falls within that budget that was put in the, township budget, and then we can stick to it and execute it. It's a
Right.
little bit backwards relative
It's
to how we might do it at
Yeah,
home.
It's completely backwards.
Yeah.
And to Helen's point, she's right. We could then, in the first quarter, write a planning grant asking for matching funds for this because they cover archaeological surveys. Right. So, and we could submit that then to the state of Pennsylvania and hopefully they'll fund half of it. So that would be on our to-do list as we get into January. 'Cause
Okay, so who's going to put this budget together?
So we have a round number already, right?
Okay.
On that. That's
I
why-
can run it by my archaeologist to see if that's what she would agree to,
Right.
so we can get kind of
So it's
All right.
20.
general
Yeah.
ballpark.
And then it'll get submitted to the township.
Right.
Then we'll make the request to the township to put it in the budget.
So can we have that as an action item then, that we'll have Helen run this past her archaeologist contact for next month?
Dan has one as well, right, Dan?
I have coworkers that are archaeologists. I don't know if they'd give me any official quotes or anything, but
Again, I'll talk to Jim Majewski about it, right? Because, I mean, Prickett wasn't as many buildings, right? I mean, it was mainly the house and the barn, right? But we're talking about a lot more buildings.
I would say there's a foundation in the backyard of the Satterthwaite house that was covered over by previous administrations. Probably should have a test pit around there. Certainly one in the center portion between the two wings of the house, and probably one on the southern side, at least 3 around the Satterthwaite house as test pits. And the same around the AOY house and the little shed, the little other houses out there and the barns.
But that'll double. I mean, if we bring in the Patterson farm, right, then yes. it's
Well,
gonna-
if we're submitting for the National Register, we're submitting the whole thing that the township owns as a united property at this point. Even though there may be separate parcels, we're going to submit it as the township's Patterson farm.
Okay. So we're gonna put on, this is the funding priority. We're gonna include the action item from include the request from just Patterson to both Patterson and Satterthwaite. And we'll refine the estimates, but it'll probably be in the area of 20 to 25 per farmstead, based on what we saw at Prickett. So,
I'll make that motion.
okay,
I'll second it.
Yes.
okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, so rounding out the funding priorities, we'll put that on. We'll put the Slate Hill Cemetery work on. And we'll put in then the matching fund. We'll put the budget together for Chris's project, and the schoolhouse, we'll just let that go until we can resolve the ownership issue around it.
Exactly.
Okay. Wow. Is it 9 o'clock yet? Oh, almost. Okay, I think that is it. They were all the topics. Does anyone else have any topics?
I'll work with Victor to see if we can do something with the slideshow to make it a more profitable. I'll email you, Victor.
Yeah, Victor,
Yep.
we're
Yeah.
open for your creativity and suggestions in terms of what we should be doing there,
All right.
so to make it as easy as possible. Okay.
And
All
Joe, related to that, and probably a topic for another day, but I was a little tardy tonight because I was at back to school night for Pennsbury. And so that always gets me thinking about how can we get more involved with the township and the school district together.
So that's what I'm working on, Dan.
Yeah. So, and at different levels too, right? So like little kids on up through high school. So that-
Well, fourth grade is when they do Pennsylvania history. So I
Right.
put together a slideshow 2 years ago when Lucy was in fourth grade. Max is now in fourth grade. So at Edgewood. So I did a 3-part long, they were lots of slides, way too many for young children. And so I want to revise that presentation and offer it to all the local Pennsbury schools. I'll talk to Ann Langtree down at the administration building to see if we can get it in all the Pennsbury schools, but at least for the ones in Lower Makefield.
Well, make sure it's done before next year because my oldest will be in fourth grade.
Okay,
Make sure she-
then we'll do it.
Oh, boy.
I
Um,
had a really great meeting with the Slack family. We went up to the golf course, and then I did a little tour of the houses along River Road, or along Taylorsville Road, and then the one on Dolington Road, and then the cemetery, and showed them Elizabeth Slack's grave with Elizabeth Slack Martin's grave at Slade Hill Cemetery, at the Slack Cemetery. And they took me to lunch at the Continental Tavern, was also owned by Aaron Slack. And Frank Lyons came out and gave us a tour of his whole dig in the basement and all his stuff in the upstairs. But at the end of it, they were saying, why don't you write a history of Lower Makefield? And the last time I and Pat Miller were together, we were discussing writing a history of Lower Makefield. So maybe that's my next project after doing the National Register. We'll look at doing a history. Write it with you, Joe, okay?
That would be a great project to undertake, Helen. Yeah. Couldn't think of a better person to do it. So, well, good. Thanks, everyone. I will send out kind of a summary. Chris, will you be able to put the minutes together?
Yeah, I will. I'm gonna watch the part I missed for back to school night at Quarry Hill. I'll watch that as soon as it goes up on YouTube, and then round out the notes and then send them over.
Sorry, I missed you, Chris. I
Yeah.
was there too.
Oh, nice, nice.
And then, for one final time, James, thank you very much. Good luck in your future endeavors, and thanks for
Thanks,
being
James.
part of our
Thank
commission.
you all.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Luck-
Thank you very
Well done,
much,
James.
James.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.